So UK TV is giving us autistic cops before autistic literally anything else. Cool. Hi pals, it's me, Auntie, they them pronouns only, and my video this week is talking about the new British crime drama featuring an autistic main character. Right, as well, I watched the show that this is basically a remake of as well. I watched that. It was in French. I wanted to talk about this particular show for so long, but felt like there was like not enough of an audience to discuss a French crime drama with an autistic main character. Like, there's not enough of an audience for that really, because I don't know anyone else who watches French crime drama, okay? I literally only watched it because the main character was autistic. Like, that was it. That's the only reason I started watching it. But now I've heard, and I've now also watched the first season that they've made so far about the UK adaptation that's based in York. So the original show is called Astrid, Murder in Paris, which stars Astrid, our autistic main character, who I would say in Astrid, Murder in Paris is in her 30s. She is someone I would say is very obviously autistic. I'll get to that in a minute. And then also Raphaelle, her bestie, who is a cop, who is super ADHD coded in the French show, but ADHD is not mentioned at all, because, you know, we always need an ADHD and an autistic main character combo in every TV show or film ever, honestly, because we are way more interesting, not gonna lie. We're funnier. Astrid lives independently, but very rigidly. Her father died a few years earlier. She had a very poor time in schools. Her mother left, I think, I can't remember, when she was very young. Astrid's dad was an investigator who was besties with some guy in like the records department, which is what led to Astrid getting a job in criminal records. And he also then became her guardian after her father died. So like technically it's kind of a conservatorship, but it is treated much more flexibly and is led by Astrid's wants and wishes, which is how conservatorships should work. And the guardianship does end in the show. The show is basically about how Raphaelle and Astrid become best friends in like kind of a gay way, honestly. They should just kiss, in my opinion, through solving crimes, because Astrid has an incredible memory but also has a special interest in puzzles and is the reason for their rising success rates. I would say that Astrid and Raphaelle are around the same age as well, just as a note. Raphaelle has a son around the age of, I don't know, because the last season he looks 17, but I'm not sure. The first season he's somewhere between like 10 and 13. Like, I literally don't know, mate. I'm not a clue, but like he's reasonably old, right? he's a child into teenager, basically. But what, yeah, Astrid is not technically a cop initially, but cop adjacent, right? And Raphaelle tends to not follow the rules and gets into trouble. And this is also like a characteristic which grates on Astrid, but also helps her to expand and grow as a person. Like, they kind of both learn from each other a lot, things that they don't have. They learn from each other and kind of are building some of those traits, which is, it's a really nice dynamic I really enjoy watching, because Raphaelle always treats Astrid with kindness and patience, and Astrid is slowly lowering her walls and accepting the fluidity of friendship and life, basically. And also we just see that Raphaelle learns to adapt to Astrid's needs and basically how to navigate that with and for her, depending on the situation. It is not uncommon for Astrid's character to have meltdowns or shutdowns in inconvenient places. They basically both are learning how to adapt to each other's access needs in a way. And it is genuinely a very sweet and loving friendship between two kind of opposing access needs, basically. I did a lot of reading up on this show before watching and whilst watching because, you know, I don't really know much about French television, like French media generally, also just being French, honestly don't know that much about any of that, you know. So I had no idea what the autistic landscape was like in France generally, but also in their media making. It seems that they worked with a lot of actually autistic people when writing the scripts and creating Astrid's character, but they didn't go as far as actually hiring an actually autistic actor for the role of Astrid. And also I couldn't find enough information about any of the other supporting cast who play autistic characters, because there are more than just her that appears in the show. So I have no idea if any of them are actually autistic or not either. In many ways, the show is really interesting and has a really great representation for autistic people. Astrid also attends a group for autistic people, like a support group, where we meet many different types of French autistic people, one of whom becomes a regular character. His name is William. He is relatively stereotypical in his interests, but he is less obviously autistic. However, he is so fucking funny in the first few episodes of meeting him. I'm just going to go into this now because I just find it so funny. He starts hitting on Raphaelle and she's like, oh no, I'm not here for this group, I'm not autistic. And he goes, oh, that's a shame. Neurotypicals are not very funny. Me! I love him, he's so funny. But he's also a very sweet character who does also help both the autistic and non-autistic characters navigating the world together. They explore many different factors of being an autistic person. You know, she was diagnosed as a child. If I can remember correctly, they cover the concept of filicide, where family kill their disabled children or family members, being institutionalized, being bullied in school, struggling with friendships and relationships, struggling with routines and overstimulation, trying to balance overt honesty and empathy, what friendships and relationships look like between an autistic and allistic person, trusting autistic people, know what they are doing or what they need, and navigating the physical aspect of romantic relationships when you are hypersensitive to physical stimuli. I was so close to getting through all of that without stumbling, but there we go. Plus, overall, navigating how to have a career you love with people you like when the institution you're working in doesn't like to or refuses to make reasonable adaptations, even when you are a highly valuable worker. I enjoy this show, like I said, because, you know, I love a murder mystery. I love a murder mystery. You know, I also enjoy puzzles. I get the same joy of watching it and working out the puzzle as Astrid also gets from solving the crimes and solving puzzles in her own universe. It's nice to have a show that I can't actually understand entirely via listening, and I need subtitles / captions, as it does force me to do less. I enjoy seeing the differences in culture norms as well, which is something that I think I've mentioned in other videos when I've talked about things like Scum or other media that I've watched that, you know, is not initially in English. I mean, I've been watching Squid Games and Alice in Borderland and things like that recently, so I'm just really enjoying myself with just like vibes of other countries, basically. What they make, you know, love it. However, my main frustrations of the original show, uno, maybe I should do this in French, Astrid's actress isn't autistic. That's like my main gripe, is that she's not autistic. Always top aggro for me for this show. And this show is just not diverse. Like, it is, but it isn't, you know. It's diverse in the way that it's like everybody who is a side character gets to be a little bit diverse, but the main characters are only allowed to be diverse a really teeny tiny amount, i.e. autistic. We have a few supporting characters that Raph and Astrid work with, who are all three men of colour. I believe 2 are black men and 1 is an Arab. And then we also have a couple of supporting characters on Astrid's side, who are again both men of colour. Both both are Mr. Tanaka. Tanaka? 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 Originally, it is an elderly man who owns and runs the Japanese supermarket shop that Astrid goes to every week for her groceries. She grew up knowing him and shopping there and learned about Japanese culture so that she could be respectful to him. One of Astrid's autistic quirks is that she is overly formal with everybody, as she finds it too confusing to navigate when it's okay to be informal. However, I am the opposite, and I will be casual with literally everybody because I don't care. I don't care. We are one in the same. We are all human. But also Mr. Tanaka also learns a lot about autism in order to be kind and respectful towards Astrid as a regular visitor, and I believe she's also the only customer they have who has put the effort into learning that much about Japanese culture in order to be respectful. He's then eventually replaced by his nephew, who is called Tetsu Tanaka, who becomes Astrid's love interest. One of the other men working within the police is also Raphaelle's on-off, will they, won't they love interest as well. And this is something that I see commonly across most media generally. The main character is always white and the love interest is not. You know? Just saying. Yeah, the main character always has to be like minimally diverse. So Astrid is a very thin, white, generically attractive woman who is also cis and straight. She is not physically disabled. The only thing is she's autistic. And then when it comes to Raphaelle, she is again a white woman who is cisgender, straight, and like her main quirk is that she's not super skinny and she has undiagnosed ADHD that everyone gets really pissed off about. There were also comments in some interviews about this show how they purposefully gave both Astrid and Raphaelle men as love interests and not each other. Yeah, they wanted to focus on the friendship between the two, which is like, I don't hate that. I don't disagree with that. And I do love their love interests. They are actually very likable characters and have much more depth and nuance than a lot of side characters tend to. But like, honestly though, they're kind of gay. Raphaelle and Astrid are kind of gay. If they're not actually lesbians or bisexual, they're practically setting up for being each other's platonic life partner, and that's still gay. And you know, it is clear that the show has put in the effort to be accurate and nuanced about autism and autistic people, but why couldn't they just fucking cast an autistic person? Why are the autistic people with the most lines all white, all cis and heterosexual? In the group, they do have a lesbian autistic person. They do also have a Native American autistic man. I can't remember who else is in that group, but like, those are the two main people who have spoken besides William and Astrid. Most of the other group either don't talk at all or are just kind of background noise, really. And as usual, I like the show as it is, but I will always have complaints. Yeah, I will always have complaints. I don't think it is a bad thing to acknowledge the things I don't like about shows that I enjoy. So, on to actually discussing the remake. Both my before watching sort of perceptions and assumptions and what actually happened, and the sort of kind of comparison of the UK version versus the French version, as they aren't entirely the same, but they do use the exact same plot lines for the first season of Cases. So the remake over here is called Patience, and that's the main character's name. You know, every autistic white girl has got to have a funky name. Some positives are they did actually cast an autistic person this time. It appears they have been doing numerous interviews on the topic of ADHD and autism in the past for like other roles they've done. They have previously played a character with, I'm not sure if I've written this down right, but they have previously played a character who either just has ADHD or ADHD and autism, and they have done interviews on their own experiences of being ADHD autistic as well. Like these were my thoughts before I actually watched the show. I do think that the actor they chose is a bit young. I think she's roughly 21, which makes this previous plot seem kind of impossible and feels like a lot of the dynamics would be very different. You know, why couldn't they cast an older autistic actor for the role? And again, the actor does resemble Astrid from the original show in a lot of ways. You know, she's very, very pale and has very, very pale blonde, like blonde white hair. But that is kind of where the resemblance ends. They are very different, which I will get into a little bit later, but I did enjoy the differences of the UK version of Patience. So I wonder if this was sort of like a stylistic choice to kind of signify, yeah, this is that show, basically. But I mean, how many pale autistics are there out there who could either wear a wig or bleach their hair? I don't know, like there's probably loads. So yeah, like I think before watching the show, I had a feeling that I would miss the same kind of dynamic that they have in the original show, where they feel a lot more on equal ground, equal footing, both in age and just how they treat each other. And also, like, a lot of shows always focus on much younger people. I would prefer more adult shows actually casting adult, like older adult people in some of these roles. Like, we know a lot of people were not diagnosed as children if they were above the age of like 25 right now, maybe even more along my age, 30, I don't know. But like, I was diagnosed a year ago. You know, I was diagnosed a year ago before I turned 30. And like, yeah, I don't know. Obviously, there's plenty of people out there who do have the experience of being diagnosed as a child. But especially at the moment, there's a lot of emphasis on people who weren't diagnosed until adulthood at some point. And that can vary from, you know, early 20s all the way up into like your 60s or older. Yeah, I just kind of feel like that was like a bit of a missed opportunity, really. And as well, I just think it's an odd choice of casting when most crime dramas are not really aimed at people around the age of 21. You know, like, crime dramas are definitely more late 20s up kind of TV shows that people watch. There's a couple of like crime drama-esque, vaguely equivalent shows that definitely could be more appealing to people age 20 and under, like Then You Run, for example, which centered a group of, I think, 4 teenage girls on the run from both the police and drug dealers. So yeah, I just kind of felt like unless they entirely changed the plot and the vibe of this show, I don't really see how it's going to fit both audience and just generally character and plot wise. Astrid Murder in Paris is also much more of like a campy crime show. A lot of things are over dramatized. Many of the things they do that goes against protocol, they, you know, get away with a lot of the time. They always get the person in the end, and the crimes can be genuinely like quite ridiculous. I don't know how the UK version would be weighing up to this particular vibe of crime drama. Like, we definitely have campy crime dramas here, but will Patience lean into the campiness? And yeah, there is also a show that does come to mind that kind of just makes me think that this show has already been done in a lot of ways. It's a show called Ludwig. Basically, Ludwig is the name of the nickname of this man called James or John or something. I don't know. He's a twin, so his brother's got the other name. And the brother is a cop who goes missing. And he has to come and pretend to be his brother and solve the puzzle. And he has a special interest in puzzles because he literally makes puzzle books. But also it is never actually addressed that he's definitely autistic as fuck. But also it's quite a typical thing of like, yeah, like kind of frumpy white dude vibe, but it is also quite campy and ridiculous. He is accidentally good at solving crimes because of his ability to make puzzles and special interest in puzzles, like, and I don't mean like jigsaw puzzles, I mean they're different kinds of puzzle, like mind puzzle games. Like, I feel like that show must have been like somewhat inspired by Astrid Murder in Paris, because it just feels a little bit too similar main character wise to not be. But honestly, I have also been noticing just a lot of TV shows have a main character who's kind of autistic coded, who loves puzzles. So generally I also struggle with direct remakes around the world, because like there's very few ways to remake a show well. My main and only show that I think has been done well is Scum, because every country that has made a version took the original format of characters and their like scripts and stories, but made it unique to the countries they're in and the particular topics relevant at that time. One example is that there is a Muslim character in the friend group, and in all the remakes I've watched so far, they all wear either like a type of headscarf or hijab to cover their hair. However, in the French version, our Muslim character cannot wear a headscarf at school because they have been banned, and that is something that's quite specific to France. Hi France, kind of shitting on you here, haha. However, you know, I do think we have quite a lot of like Yorkshire, generally like Midlands, Northern crime dramas, camp and not camp, so I don't think that the actual making of a crime drama in York is a bad thing. I also think York is a really beautiful old, like rustic kind of town, city centre, whatever, I don't know, mate. So it would be quite visually nice to look at. And actually I originally was like, oh, why did they choose York when London's right there? I forgot actually how great some of the streets and locations in York are for just like a really nice aesthetic backdrop that does actually give a similar vibe to Astrid Murder in Paris. So when it came to actually me watching Patience, I watched it relatively quickly because there's not many episodes. I still kind of feel like it's a little bit of an oversight of casting someone so young. It does really change the dynamic between the two people, but I do really like the actor actually. I have no idea what their name is for the life of me, but I actually really like her acting. I feel like she was much more able to capture the kind of under the radar autistic person that I am, that a lot of my friends are, a lot of people that we hear about and from are, and we don't really see a lot of in media. She is just quite kind of so, like, it's so hard to express, because me saying, oh, she's socially awkward is what people use to describe like all autistic people. And yeah, sure, Astrid is also socially awkward too. However, her physicality is just entirely different to Patience. Patience is more loose, and I said to one of my friends that actually she reminds me of her. The way she uses her facial expressions and the way her body moves, it's almost sort of like, it's much looser than Astrid's interpretation. It's much looser in almost like a hypermobile way, which I enjoy that interpretation because I know how high the comorbidity rate of autism and hypermobile disorders is. And it's not that she doesn't make facial expressions, it's that her facial expressions don't necessarily match the situation. And she's a lot more almost humorous in her expressions, rather than Astrid does feel like the stereotype of robotic movements. And like her gait is odd in a way that doesn't really make sense and is never really explained. I mean, I guess it could be explained away by sensory issues, but like she basically has a limp, and I don't really get what that's about. And yeah, she's a much more of an obvious autistic in Astrid, because you can see her sort of like stimming with her hands a lot more. You can see it on her face a lot more when she is overwhelmed by loud noise or is beginning to have a meltdown. Whereas when it comes to Patience, it is a much more subtle performance, which reads as someone who has had to learn to mask to some degree. So I really, really do like her interpretation of Patience. There are also a few other changes. She has a cat, she has a lizard, and she has secret mice in her work. Which is a bit of a stretch, honestly. Why does your work not care that you've, or how do they not know that you've got mice in like a huge terrarium thing? I also find that Astrid's face and facial expressions are very like not there, like no one's home, looking away into the middle distance kind of vibe. Whereas Patience is much more like, you can tell she's in the room, but she's struggling with the eye contact, she's struggling with where she should be looking, and is a little bit on edge. Whereas yeah, I just like, it's hard. I definitely don't want to overly critique Astrid and that character, because I believe that there are plenty of autistic people in the real world, real people who act, look and behave like that. So as somebody who doesn't, and that is a privilege that, you know, I'm not necessarily overtly spotted as an autistic from afar, I don't want to overly criticise that and say things like it's unrealistic, you know. I think my main issue is that it's hard to really know where the realistic interpretation begins, where it ends, and where the stereotypes just kind of begin, because they did work with a lot of autistic people. But I think because that actor is not autistic, I find it really hard to believe it, honestly. Like, yeah, there are lots of things where I'm like, oh, mood, that's so me.
She's just like me for real.
You know? But like, yeah. So like, I don't want to overly criticise that and say this is unrealistic, because I don't think it is unrealistic. I just find it hard to believe because I know she's not autistic in real life. And obviously as well, like I was saying at the very beginning, I don't really know a lot about French culture generally. I don't know what it's like being autistic and French in France. So yeah, one of the differences that I think is quite interesting with the UK version is that yes, Patience has a special interest in doing these mind puzzles, but it's kind of pushed to the point of actually she repeatedly does them to try and outdo herself, and she keeps track of her timings. So she times herself doing the puzzles and has like lists and lists and lists of when she did them and how long it took her. And I feel like that might be a little bit more leaning into a lot of typical autistic traits of like, well, you know, who cares? Why are people keeping track of that? I think, honestly, one of the main disappointments for me is actually the casting of Raphaelle. I don't like her. I don't like her. I feel like she doesn't have the charm that the French Raphaelle has. And also it is really funny, in like an ironic sad way, that Patience is doing the same thing with the side characters being people of colour. However, they've actually removed a few and made it more white and worse, honestly. We don't have, at least in this season, the Japanese men who own the supermarket. We don't have the black cop who is Raphaelle's boss. Won't go any further on any other thoughts on that, but yeah. Also, they're just not as, I don't know, they're just not as involved in the plot half the time. Like, they're not there. There are some much more relatable aspects to Patience in this show, especially for like younger autistic people. Things are like when men approach you at the bus stop hitting on you and you're like, I don't know what to do, and for some reason you give them the phone number. Also the fact that she doesn't answer the phone if she doesn't know who's calling her. Same. However, I was it's a little bit boring that she still only listens to classical music like Astrid does in the French version. I feel like that's a very boring autistic trope. I think a lot of autistic people just listen to, like, I like a lot of different kinds of music, and for me a lot of the time it's just the right kind of like energy for the vibe needed. Like, I love loud music, and I love music that's not like the old people say is not music. But also I love music that old people think is music. I do just think that's a little bit of a dull cop-out. Like, come on, just either just make them just ear defenders, or just have her listening to like something that young people listen to. I don't know. To me as well, she feels kind of queer coded. I like that her little outfits are a lot more actually personal style rather than literally the same outfit every day like Astrid. Again, that feels a little bit too on the nose of autistic stereotypes. Like, you know, she has a similar vibe, work vibe, but it is kind of odd, weird, quirky for work, but it suits her character, and there's probably some kind of sensory vibes behind why. And she has sort of like a colour set that she likes to wear that feels more true to autistic people around my age. I also am just like, I just find it really dull again with the overly placing things on tables, like laying things out really precisely that almost errs into OCD stereotypes. I'm just like, I don't know, I don't really care about that as well. I feel like that's just a little bit, again, too on the nose that they carried on into the UK version. They do, however, seem to have the ridiculousness of the UK bureaucracy correct in this show. Patience brings an extra file with similar like patterns to the murder, and she gets in trouble for it because she's done this before, and one particular member of staff on her team or whatever is making a complaint about her because of it. Like, bro, she's just being helpful. Like, sorry, no, not at all. Not sorry. And also, like, it seems like everyone except from the Raphaelle double, who's called B, and Nico, who is the love interest in the French version, like, everyone except those two have a York or like Midlands northern accent. And I just find that a little bit odd. Like, why are those two specifically? Like, that the guy sounds like Fred from Call the Midwife. And yeah, like I said, I just don't find B as charming as the French Raphaelle. Like I said, the French Raphaelle is taller, fuller figured. She has a much more, I don't know, likeable face. She's very funny. And like, yeah, the UK version, she's not exactly coming across as a great parent. She ignores her child constantly, really forgets about him all the time. He's not even in her custody, which I'm pretty sure he's in her custody in the French version. Doesn't even remember what her kid wants or likes. And he's been acting up in school, and he acts up in the same way to his mother. And honestly, I can't blame him. Later on, it's brought up that he could possibly have ADHD and he should be assessed. And I think that's maybe one of the good additions to the UK version, is bringing up the idea of, oh yeah, we're a lot more on it with noticing, hey, kids might be autistic or ADHD now. And I think if there is further seasons of the UK one, that it may come up that, oh yeah, hi B, this kid's mum, have you considered being assessed for ADHD? So I think at least the UK version, like the UK production and writers and whatever, picked up on the same thing that I picked up from the French version, which is Raphaelle has fucking ADHD. She needs to be diagnosed and treated. There was a moment I found a little bit, another moment I found irritating when it came to the Patience version. Like, it happens in the French version too, but in the UK version, she's sort of rehearsing a phone call to B, and she does like a flow chart. And because B answers and doesn't just say hello right away, she panics because the only answer she has is like hello to answering the phone. And it just doesn't make sense, because she does then eventually go hello, 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 because like Patience hasn't spoken on the other end of the phone. So it's like, well, look, see, they've said hello now, so carry on with your flowchart. And honestly, even if people didn't say hello, just skip the hello, go to the next part of the flowchart. Like, I understand the struggle with making phone calls. I don't like them either. I really struggle. But that just, when it comes to this being an issue for Patience, it just didn't really make a whole lot of sense. It made more sense when Astrid was doing that, because she definitely seems to have less social capabilities generally in the show. She does also have a guardian in the UK one and does live with him, but she almost kind of has like a mini flat in the loft, like a mini studio. Also, hella nice studio. The fuck? Where do I get one of those? There was also another bit that annoyed me about Patience as well, is that 7 people got in the lift where the maximum was 6 people. And it's like, come on mate, most of them are fucking skinny. This is for reasonably like heavier people, to be honest. One extra person is not going to disrupt the weight limit. So again, I just didn't like that aspect of it. It felt a little bit too much of an oversimplification of autistic concerns generally. Also, the person doing the post-mortems is a woman in the UK one rather than a man like in the French one. Which is an interesting dynamic shift. I think it does then remove the whole patriarchal vibe, annoyingly. But she does seem to almost like accept Patience's thoughts and feedback on whatever faster in the UK version rather than the French version. So maybe that's because they're both women. It was also referenced that actually when she was younger, Patience was misdiagnosed or nearly misdiagnosed with schizophrenia instead of autism, and was nearly institutionalized for that. So good thing that her father didn't listen to this guy. Also, my quick note of like the way she moves reminds me of Pandora in Skins. The way she's a lot more like floppy rather than rigid. I also just like, I don't know, this was something that was added, I'm pretty sure, because I don't remember this coming up in the French version, but basically like Patience doesn't seem to do or enjoy anything because there's always like something bad in those things. So like she doesn't drink because toxins. She doesn't drink coffee because some other kind of poison or toxin. And it just kind of seems to keep going, that she doesn't consume basically anything because there's a possibility of toxins. Like, it just felt a little bit much generally. Like, come on, it's coffee, girl. Like, you don't have to like coffee. You can just not like coffee or not want to drink caffeine specifically. Yeah, I just feel like some of the additions were just a little bit like, I don't know, didn't fit her character. Some of the additions fit her character so well. Yeah, just frustrating. When it came to the actual autistic people group, we have a very similar looking actor for Will. But he also goes by Billy, so he literally has the same name, which I find really funny. He is also younger as well. I think he is closer to the age of Patience, I guess, to make more sense as a peer support kind of thing. One woman mentions in the group that she has to hide in the toilet not to have a meltdown when she's at work. They talk about how they're spoken to poorly and ignored. One guy says that about work. Another man says that his co-worker's dog was better looking than her baby, which is such a white autistic man thing to say. There was also a mother of an autistic child there, which I actually really like the inclusion of. It's good that she went to that group rather than an autism mums group, because she actually is learning from autistic adults' experiences of life rather than the not so great side of autism mums and oppression and ableism vibes. This is the group that Raphaelle kind of comes in on. So the UK version B comes in on, and she relates to some of the issues that these people are having, or this woman has with her child, with what she struggles with her child, and she becomes a bit worried that maybe her son's autistic. There was a really funny phrase, or like a funny moment, where B wants Patience on her like investigative team because of her knowledge of the records and very good problem solving skills and memory, etc. And her boss isn't keen, but he goes, oh, you know, it would actually burst the diversity statistics, so maybe it's not such a bad idea. I just thought it was really funny because that is literally what we are, a tick box 90% of the time. Also, the UK William Billy has a slightly less stereotypical autistic special interests compared to the French one. In the UK version, he is obsessed with mountain bikes, and he also collects loyalty cards, which feels very British. Do we have is that a British thing? Do we just have loads of loyalty cards for shops for no reason? So I liked that, a slight diversion from the constant repeating of autistic stereotypes. I need to look up, is he autistic? I don't know. I need to look up if that actor is autistic as well, because I haven't. I'm not gonna lie. They also, like, I don't know, they seem to keep some jokes in that didn't really make sense in English, if you ask me. There's this guy who I don't know who he is, whatever they do, but like it's the people who come in and pick up all the evidence and stuff during crime scenes. So there's this guy, him. He's also in the French version. However, Astrid does not like him. She does not fancy him. He just has a big old crush on her and she's like, no thank you. In this version, again, he is younger, so closer to Patience's age, and he has a little gay hoop earring. And his name is Elliot Scott, and the joke that Patience makes is that he has a last name for a first name and a first name for a last name, and I don't get it because there are so many people with the first name Elliot or the first name Scott and then same for their last name. So that just that didn't work. It's not funny. It's not a good joke. Why was it kept in? I actually know less first name Scotts than last name Scotts, to be honest, but like I've known both. There is also the mention that B is going through menopause as well, so she blames a lot of very ADHD traits on that. So again, it's good that there is a mention of menopause. I think Raphaelle in Astrid Murder in Paris is a little bit too young for the menopause sort of plot line. And there was just a really, it was good and bad moment in this one particular episode where at a crime scene somebody hands B a mask, like literally just a surgical mask to put on, and she's like, you know, the pandemic's over. It ain't. Like, straight up, whoever put that in the script. Anyway, she got poisoned because of that. Like, there are so many reasons to wear a mask besides COVID. And plenty of them are to do with being at possibly dangerous crime scenes. Like, yeah, good. I don't respect you. So, like, that added to me disliking that character even more. However, later on in the show, Patience does say that surgical masks aren't great against COVID, let alone anthrax. So, you know, at least the autistics know. At least the autistics know. And yeah, when it comes to the relationship between Patience and B versus what it was like with Raphaelle and Astrid, it is very different. B, clearly, she just kind of comes across as like a kind of an immature woman in her 40s or 50s, very irresponsible, and like I know a lot of that can be ADHD traits, so I'm trying not to be like overly mean about it. And it's like, oh yeah, we're friends, Patience, and Patience is like, we're friends? What? And it's like, you work together, and she's like double your age, if not more. Not that you can't be friends with people older than you, but and I kind of see this erring in the direction of like Patience is more of like an older sibling vibe to B's son, and almost like an adopted daughter of some kind, which, yeah, won't have the same vibe as the original show, which is really sad in a lot of ways. Oh, also, speaking of, I forgot, I didn't write this in my notes, but this really pissed me off, right? This really pissed me off. Spoilers as hell, but like literally right at the end, like she's clearly kind of like interested in Scott Elliot, or whatever his name is, and like he's clearly like a little bit interested in her, and he asks her on a date, and she's like, haha, lol, I don't know, leave me alone, bye. But then like B's dying of anthrax poisoning in the hospital, so she's like, oh, I don't know, like I think I'm interested in you, but like right now all I can feel is these feelings about B nearly being dead because of anthrax. And then something happens, and then she's just like, oh, I'm just gonna kiss him anyway. So they give like I think it took like 3 seasons for Astrid to have any kind of possible relationship, and they held off until somewhere in the middle or the end of season 4 for Astrid to even kiss her partner, because she's so overly like sensitive to touch. And again, every autistic person is different. However, for the plot, it's not great. It's not good. You know, we have nothing to look forward to at this point, really. We don't have a do they, don't they. We have a, oh, well, that's happened then. We don't know anything about this man. We barely know anything about Patience and B still. It's been 1 season of like maybe 8 episodes. And it was just a bit of a cheap plot device, in my opinion, to just go, yeah, let's give him a kiss. They barely know each other. They've never even been on a date. And I did think they might have actually been leaning towards Patience and Billy possibly becoming an item, but Billy still has a hacker girlfriend in this universe, like William does in France. But I hope they break up and maybe Billy and Patience get together instead. Like, I don't know. Like the guy who she has kissed, it seems fine. It was just not built up enough in the plot. So I don't like it. And it basically leaves nothing for the next season, really, for the two of them, if you ask me. So like that really, really pissed me off. I really didn't like that. So, yes, there's spoilers all over the place. Also, like, I wanted to talk about this as well, because I just find it interesting that we don't really get to see canon autistic adults doing literally anything. But, oh, they've got to either be a cop or cop adjacent. That's the only acceptable way we're going to see any autistic person like me or people who I know. Because if you ask me, she's got the vibe of like a researcher rather than a cop adjacent person. Also, she's a little bit too law abiding for me personally, and I do think that that is propaganda. I do think that this is a new version of propaganda that we've got to be aware of, that, you know, the autistic person who's like cop adjacent but not technically a cop currently, saying to her actual cop friend that they should do things by the book, do things by the law, blah blah blah, as if we don't know about corruption. Hello? Is anybody there? Like, sorry my love, where is the PDA autistic? Bring me on. I'll be right there. I'll be there for you when the cops want to tell you what to do, and I'll say no. Yeah, can we make her more PDA autistic instead of religiously law-abiding and rule-abiding? Especially because of her age, if you ask me, babe. If you ask me, babe, it makes more sense. Because of her age, if she was actually somewhat more resistant to the police. But who knows? Maybe she is just the big growing up with a cop dad and propaganda everywhere. Who knows? Who knows? So, yeah, welcome to England, where we haven't seen a canon autistic character in a fucking while, and the first one we get is propaganda. Obey the law, do what cops tell you to do, even though we know they will literally rather be what they do. So yeah, whilst I feel like there have been some improvements on the character or the plot when it comes to autism, there's just a lot of things I preferred about the original one, and there are some changes that were made to the UK one that suck. So there you go. Welcome. I truly have nothing else to say. I don't know. I'm really frustrated because this is one of the few English autistic characters who I'm like, she's just like me for real. And then she's a cop, basically. It's a bit disappointing, a bit saddening. Will I carry on watching it? I don't know, because I could remember every single plot. I haven't watched the first season of Astrid Mother in Paris again, like, at all. I haven't watched it in maybe at least over a year, but I remembered all of them. As soon as they came up and set it up, I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. I knew what happened. They didn't even change the plots a little bit. They didn't change the plots. So I don't know. Anyway, I have made other videos where I have talked about autistic representation in TV shows. Depends on what your preference is. I made a video a while ago, it's quite old now, like 2 years, where I talked about why we enjoy watching medical and crime dramas when we know in real life a lot of the people in these services suck. So yeah, you should maybe go check that one out and let me know what your thoughts are. And actually, speaking of, seeing as I did kind of compare Patience to Pandora, I did make a video discussing Pandora as an autistic character versus the canon autistic character in the same generation that you should definitely go and check out as well. So that's all I've got for you this week. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know in the comments if there's anything that you would like me to talk about specifically. And that's it. That's all I've got for you this week. I'll see you next week. Bye.